The United Arab Emirates. My time in the UAE was unplanned, unexpected, and short, just 3 days. Because the Pakistanis used the date on my visa as an excuse to deny me entry into the country. And they sent me back where I came from, which was Dubai. 3 days, however, was long enough to determine that the UAE is a very well-run and wealthy country with an ultra-modern infrastructure, excellent city planning, and even better strategic long-term planning, as well as a cosmopolitan outlook. Its problems are threefold. First, the changing climate is making the country uninhabitable, as it is too hot during the summer months to be outside or in non-air-conditioned environments. Second, the country relies primarily on oil revenue, which is a non-renewable resource that will soon be exhausted. And third, expatriates make up 85% of the UAE's workforce, all of whom will leave the UAE as soon as it runs out of fossil fuels to export. The second and third problems can be solved, but the first cannot. It can only be mitigated against. The second problem, its heavy reliance on fossil fuels, can be addressed by making renewables their primary energy source, especially solar energy. They have more sun and they know what to do with, and by diversifying its economy. The country's leaders plan on having 44% of the UAE's energy mix derived from renewables by 2050. This will allow it to export oil for a longer period, while at the same time funding its transition to renewables, a process that can be timed to make the country a renewable energy powerhouse by the time it runs out of fossil fuels to export. And in this fashion, it will replace its revenue from fossil fuels with revenue from renewable energy exports. According to estimates by the Dubai government, the current oil reserves are estimated to last until 2045. As such, its goal of having 44% of its energy mix derived from renewables by 2050 is nowhere near ambitious enough. It is in fact woefully insufficient. The country needs to not only cover all its energy needs with renewables by 2045, but also export enough green energy to derive 30% of its GDP from renewables and 13% of its exports, which is what it receives from the sale of fossil fuels now. To accomplish its diversification goals, the country is currently investing some $350 billion in tourism and business, and is already the most diversified economy among the members of the Gulf Cooperation Council. But it is nowhere near as diversified as it would need to be to maintain its current GDP and standard of living, and it is questionable that it can achieve this goal considering its total dependence on foreign labor and know-how. The UAE currently exports 3.3 million barrels of oil per day and expects to export 4.94 million barrels per day by 2028. As such, it is depleting its oil reserves faster and faster from year to year and is not replacing its revenue from fossil fuels with revenue from tourism and other economic activities fast enough. To my knowledge, the UAE is not preeminent in any other industry than petroleum extraction. If the UAE cannot replace its old revenues with revenues from other industries by 2045, its economy will collapse as fast as it grew. And it grew by an astonishing 231 times since 1971. And if it cannot diversify its economy successfully away from the one commodity that enable its phenomenal economic success, it will lose 85% of its workforce, the proportion that is currently made of expatriates, the very people that give its economy the know-how and industriousness the native population lacks, and with which the UAE wants to propel the country to preeminence in other industries and position itself as a trade gateway to Africa, Asia, and Europe due to its geographic location. I cannot see how a country without natural resources other than hydrocarbons can become an economic powerhouse once its hydrocarbons run out. I therefore foresee a halving of its GDP by 2060, a reduction that will start around 2040. The UAE Vision 2021 and the National Innovation Strategy, the two state-sponsored diversification plans undertaken by the UAE government, intend to transition the country to a knowledge-based economy by attaining excellence in 6 national priority areas. 1. World-class healthcare. 2. First-rate education system. 3. Sustainable environment and infrastructure. 4. Cohesive society and preserved identity. 5. Safe, public and fair judiciary. 6. Competitive knowledge-based economy. Given the UAE's track record and good governance, I'm certain it will partially succeed, but not to the extent needed to maintain its current nominal GDP, which is the 20th highest in the world, and even less so its purchasing power parity per capita GDP, which is the 6th highest in the world. Let us assume for a second that the UAE will transition successfully from a one-commodity economy and will become a knowledge-based society, capable of attracting and retaining the foreign workforce it has built its prosperity on. How will it solve the problem of its changing climate that makes the country uninhabitable during the summer months and condemns its citizens to indoor air-conditioned spaces? You all saw how I struggled to walk 7 kilometers from Al Manzar Beach Park to my hotel and succeeded only by taking refuge in 4 air-conditioned spaces along the way. Otherwise, I would have passed out and died on the deserted streets of Sharjah, the satellite city of Dubai. In asking myself the question how the UAE will solve the problem of its changing climate, I found out 2 things. First, that the UAE's annual average temperatures are set to increase by 1.5 to 2 degrees by 2040 and punish the country with hotter weather, less precipitation, droughts, higher sea levels, and increased frequency of dust and sandstorms. And second, that the country has a plan in place to deal with this. The National Climate Change Plan of the United Arab Emirates 2017 to 2050. The first is discouraging to say the least, and the second encouraging, as it shows that the country's leaders are not asleep at the wheel, but are actively planning for a future that will be very different. In the very preamble of this document, we find a quote by the late Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan, the founder of the UAE. He stated that, I quote, "Future generations will be living in a world that is very different from that to which we are accustomed. It is essential that we prepare ourselves and our children for that new world." End of quote. Had he not had such foresightedness, the country would not be where it is today and would have had no chance of making it into the future. As it is, it at least has a chance to make it into the future, despite the odds. The plan has 3 overarching goals. 1, to decouple emissions from economic growth. 2, to make the nation's economy and infrastructure climate-proof and thus protect the people and ecosystems against climate-related impacts. And 3, to diversify the economy towards key emerging sectors that are resource efficient, generate high added value, and create jobs in green businesses. I can only hope the country will succeed, but I can guarantee you that it will not unless it stabilizes its population first. I suspect, however, that the hidden plan behind the open plan is to build compact cities like Neom, the Lion City the Saudis are erecting in the desert, that are fully powered by renewable energy, or at least to build a renewable energy infrastructure for the homes of the natives and some expats that are deemed indispensable, and then send all foreigners packing once the oil runs out. Currently, the country's population has just 11.6% native Emirati Arabs, that's just 1.5 million Arabs, and 88.4% foreigners, or 8.92 million foreigners. There are 3 times more Indians than there are Emiratis in the UAE, and nearly as many Bangladeshis and Pakistanis as there are native Emiratis. There are also about 500,000 Westerners. Those with the money necessary to buy themselves a place in the country or with skills that no native possesses and the country needs will be able to stay, while the rest will be shipped home. That the UAE intends to derive only 44% of its energy mix by 2050 may well be an indication that by 2050 it intends to have only 44% of the current population. That is to say, just 4.6 million people, since the rest will have no fossil fuels to live on and no renewable energy. And if half of the renewable energy the UAE will produce by 2050 will be needed to export to maintain the standard of living that the native population has become accustomed to, then the UAE will have only 2.3 million people in 2050. In other words, just the native population that by then will have grown to about 1.9 billion from the current 1.9 million from the current 1.5 million. And the remaining 400,000 or so will be expats deemed indispensable due to their skills or wealth. If this is indeed the master plan behind the public plan, it would also explain why the UAE government only grants strictly limited employment permits, but no path to citizenship to its 8.92 million workers. In 2021, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed announced that the government, and I quote, adopted law amendments that allow granting the UAE citizenship to investors, specialized talents, and professionals, including scientists, doctors, engineers, artists, authors, and their families. The new directive aims to attract talents that contribute to our development journey. End of quote. This excludes at least 8.5 million out of the 8.9 million foreigners currently in the country, and supports my hypothesis about the government's master plan. How many talented foreigners with special skills and wealth will choose to live in a country that is becoming uninhabitable, however, only time will tell. I, for one, cannot see myself making my home in a country where I cannot walk 2 kilometers without finding an air-conditioned space to recover from the heat before I pass out. Nor can I see myself bringing my family to a place where no tree can survive without irrigation and the land is covered in sand, and nothing but sand as far as the eye can see, as much as I love the look of the desert. But the reason I would not do that is because there is no guarantee that the technology which sustains life in a place where life is not supposed to thrive will not fail. All technology sooner or later fails, and when that happens in a place where the temperatures can reach or can top 60 degrees Celsius, no one is safe, be they rich or poor, educated or uneducated, smart or dumb. Nor is there any guarantee that the supply chains that enable millions to be fed with imported food will not be interrupted by man-made or natural disasters. And since the UAE grows none of its food, any such interruption would endanger the lives of millions. Luckily, the people who run Dubai have made plans to address this problem too. I'm not aware if the rest of the country has similar master plans, but if Dubai pursues its urban transformation master plan, it will succeed in making the city not only livable but also desirable. What it intends to do is bring back life to the coastal area, make wellness and leisure activities possible in the city, and grow the city's appeal as a tourist destination, which is to be the mainstay of its economy. The Dubai Reef, a 200 square kilometer artificial reef that will wrap around the entire city's coast, will have 1 billion corals and 100 million mangrove trees. Its purpose is to restore and enhance the marine habitats lost due to the mega projects that were built on land reclaimed from the sea, namely the Palm Islands and the World Islands. The Dubai Reef is to be completed by 2040 and meant to become, quote, a blueprint for ocean living while mitigating the impacts of climate change, unquote. The Dubai Loop, another mega project, is to be a 90-kilometer long covered and air-conditioned urban highway for walking and cycling only, no cars, to connect the entire city with modes of transportation that are environmentally friendly and healthy. The loop would also have mixed-use infrastructure that provides leisure and wellness facilities for the residents, with indoor parks for recreational activities and social gatherings. The loop will be powered by renewable energy and will have kinetic flooring that transforms vibrations from walking and cycling into electricity. Very cool. The Dubai Moon, a 200-meter in diameter scaled model of the moon, that will cost $5 billion to build and will be a luxury hotel and resort that will allow guests to experience space travel on Earth. It will have 4,000 rooms and an arena with a capacity of 10,000 people. Then there is the Dubai Healthcare City, which is to be a futuristic floating island intended to provide both quality healthcare and luxurious living that will bring together the best of Dubai and will use technologies that are not yet available. It will have 1 million square meters of education and research facilities at the core, 14 specialized hospitals in the first ring around the core, and 24 hotels on the outside ring. This floating city is meant to help Dubai achieve its first national priority stated in its state-sponsored diversification plan, that of becoming a world-class healthcare center. The entire floating island will be accessible from the mainland through a dedicated underwater highway and transportation system that will make use of futuristic modes of transport. The Dubai 2050 Urban Master Plan wants to, quote, shape Dubai into one of the most livable cities in the world, end of quote, by creating 5 city centers to enhance the city's efficiency. These 5 city cores, which will designate specific areas in the city for specific purposes, will be connected by 2040 by a system of sustainable rapid transit that will make every area of Dubai accessible in just 20 minutes. Dubai also aims to double the size of its green areas and to allocate 60% of its land to nature reserves and wildlife sanctuaries. Unfortunately, the land is becoming too hot to sustain any wildlife whatsoever, and the most one could hope to achieve is to build green spaces through extensive irrigation. None of these plans, however, will be sustainable if the UAE does not stabilize its population first. As it is, 10.4 million people are entirely dependent on imported food, and as the population grows throughout the world, the competition for food will also grow. Soon, all countries will be forced to stop exporting any food since they will need everything they produce for their own internal consumption. What will happen to the UAE then? What will happen to a country that can grow no food, has no water and no resources, and has a population density of 121 people per square kilometers? By contrast, Europe's population density is only 106 people per square kilometer, but Europe can grow its own food and has plenty of water and fertile soil. One need only walk into a grocery store in the UAE to see that everything on display comes from elsewhere in the world. And in looking at the ware and the packages, one can clearly see that every item has been shipped and handled many times and has gone through many hands and suffered a lot of abuse and a lot of temperature changes, because every package is wrinkled and tired and looks like someone sat on it and used it as a pillow. Interestingly, the UAE appeared in the 2014 Overshoot Index as the 3rd most overpopulated and unsustainable country in the world after Singapore and Kuwait. The 2014 Overshoot Index, which has been scrubbed from the internet by the global censorship apparatus, along with the 2016 Overshoot Index, informed us that the UAE can only sustain 500,000 people. In the 2016 Overshoot Index, the UAE was no longer to be found. The amount of money it must have paid to Population Matters, the non-profit organization that published the Overshoot Index, and the political pressure it exerted in order to be disappeared from the 2016 Overshoot Index are unknown to me, but both were undoubtedly record-breaking. No amount of censorship, however, will protect the UAE and its people from starvation and collapse once none of the countries that produce excess food now will have any excess food to export in the future, because they will need it to feed their own exploding populations. The UAE is, as it is, can only survive into the future if every country on earth stabilizes its population and reduces it to sustainability. My policy prescriptions for the UAE people and government are as follows. 1. Switch to renewables, primarily solar, long before the oil runs out to be able to replace oil revenue with green energy revenue. 2. Build vertical farms powered by solar energy to cover the nutritional needs of the population and rely on imports only for grains and for exotic foods. Resilience is not possible without food independence. This is the first and foremost national security priority. 3. Integrate your living and agricultural spaces in the same way the Saudis are doing at NEOM, as that is the only model that will enable the survival of millions in an environment where human beings cannot live outside artificial environments for months on end due to extreme heat. And 4, and last, stop building roads and bridges. Instead, consolidate your living spaces around modes of public transport to reduce the need for private cars, all of which will be electric or hydrogen in the near future. You may want to consider covering your cities in glass domes to control the environment for the entire city through massive air conditioning installations and reflective glass, rather than for every home and apartment individually. Furthermore, construct climate-controlled underground rail lines to connect your cities for the transportation of goods and overhead highways for flying personal vehicles for the transportation of people. Your country is ideally suited for flying cars since you have no vegetation and no mountains. It is also ideally suited for flying electric cars since you have an abundance of sunlight throughout the year. Electric flying vehicles should be one of the areas in which you can diversify your economy. We should also start manufacturing climate-controlled suits so that people can spend time outdoors and not be confined to air-conditioned indoor spaces all the time. Unless these policy prescriptions are implemented, the UAE will collapse due to lack of qualified people by 2040 and environmentally due to extreme heat, sometimes between 2040 and 2050.